Hi, welcome to this webinar. As you know, my name is Debbie Taraka, and I am going to be discussing the topic of building a booty. Sounds kind of funny. My teenage daughters make fun of me with this, but when we're talking about building a booty, and I know I've had some inquiries about this, we're really talking about building the dog's rear end. So not only do we want to, of course, see nice muscling, but there are reasons for building a rear end. I my clinic, Wizard of Paws, we work a lot with both rehab patients as well as sports and conditioning clients. And I'll never forget this. My younger daughter was probably about 5 years old and hanging out with me in the clinic. And I had made a comment that I always like to see a strong ass or a strong booty on a working dog because, for obvious reasons, for their propulsion and just getting them to reach and extend and drive through the rear. Well, of course, like most children do, she repeated this in school, but she repeated it as my mom likes to see a nice ass on a dog. I was like, oh, it's kind of hard to explain to some of the teachers what I do to begin with, but never mind after that comment. So I always laugh when I'm talking about building a booty, or I say it to clients and they wonder what is going on. So when we talk about building a booty with a dog, we are talking about the hind end. So really looking at the muscles of the rear. And we can see with this dog, not the greatest rear end. Dogs use their hind limbs specifically, and I'll repeat these again, the different muscles, the hamstrings and the gluteals, to really power and propel themselves. So these muscles are used in activities such as climbing upstairs, jumping in a car, jumping on the couch, jumping onto the bed, going over an agility jump, propelling through the field. So it's really the muscles that give them the drive or the activity there. And if we look specifically at the muscles, we have the hamstrings, and the hamstrings consist of the biceps femoris, the semitendinosus, the semimembranosus. Then we have the gluteals. The dogs differ in the size of their gluteals from people, in that the fact that the dogs are quadruped, we're biped, so our gluteals are actually larger than the dogs, but they're still very active in extension in the dog. The abductors, or the outside muscles, the adductors, or the inside muscles, specifically a muscle called the gracilis, and you also have the large adductors in there. And then the gastrocnemius, which is we would consider part of the calf muscle. So these muscles of the booty, specifically in the back of the leg. And as I mentioned, the hip extensors are what are called the booty. And we will see them very active in working dogs. So the dog on the left is a working German Shepherd, and we've set up some balance here and some work. So he's challenging his rear end. And the picture on the right, this is a show dog that won a Group 1 owner handled, and using those hind end muscles, those hip extensors, really to look at reach and drive. Often I hear that people want their dogs to get more drive from the rear. So this is one of the reasons that we want to work that area. And why is the booty so important? Well, hind end strength is important just for the general health of the dog. They help, the hip extensors are going to help with the support of the hind limb. So just in standing, if we see a dog starting to sink when they're standing, sometimes our older dogs will do this. It may be from a weak hind end, maybe from weak core muscles, could be from neurological, or a combination of all of the above. These hip extensors assist with stabilization. So strengthening and supporting that rear. So again, helping to stabilize the body. Dogs normally put 30 to 40% of their weight on the rear in a stance and 60 to 70% of their weight on the forelimbs in a stance. However, when the dog starts to become active with walking, trotting, and jumping, those numbers get a lot higher on the rear. So they're also responsible for generating power and propulsion. So again, the one of the first things I think about if a dog is having trouble getting upstairs is one, if they're in pain, of course, but then two, are they weak in the rear? Are they having a tough time keeping or gaining muscle for whatever reason? We also really need these areas strong for the support with hip issues and also stifle issues, so knee issues. So canine hip dysplasia, osteoarthritis, iliopsoas issues, because the hip flexors become so tight and restricted, we often see a loss of strength in the rear. As I mentioned, with cranial cruciate injuries, we want to have very strong hamstrings with any cruciate deficient stifle, or in other words, an injury to the cranial cruciate. The hamstrings need to work a little bit harder to stabilize that knee or that stifle. And really, we need these muscles both in young and old dogs. So we see this poodle puppy here. She actually had hip surgery, so we're working on getting her strength back, and she was able to compete in the show ring and is actually doing very well. Then on the right side, we see the senior dog that is sinking a little bit lower in the rear, building up some strength, and I'll talk about the different methods of doing this as well as we move along. So I'm going to see if this will work here. So when we look at the measurements, I couldn't transfer this over into my PowerPoint. So we want to measure up at the inner thigh, and I recommend doing this every other week. So bear with me while I just get this on the screen here, and you can look at the measurements.
Circumference, we want to use a tape measure. The easiest way will be to bring the tape measure up underneath, right into the crease of the leg, to come up as high as you can go, then come around and just make a little bit of a crisscross and come up that way. So we are measuring about 42.22 centimeters right here. So again, we'll just come up, bring it up, come to the most relaxed spot, and we'll hit it.
So if that, you can just, again, coming right up a tape measure. It doesn't have to be a fancy tape measure. Could be
Poppy is a Vizsla Lab mix, and she's the princess.
So sorry about that. Not sure what happened there. But we'll want to measure every other week, not every day. Ideally, when you start working on muscles for, building up muscles, we should see an honest improvement within 10 to 14 days of doing the exercises consistently. So very important that we don't try to measure every day, because we can get discouraged and all of that. I also recommend, if you're doing it in standing, continue to do it in standing. The muscles are going to be a little bit more active and more engaged in a standing position than when lying down. The other thing to do is to take photos. So taking photos of your dog's rear and sides on a regular basis is important. This Akita was in my canine conditioning class. We can see on the top photo how straight he is in the rear, and actually not so much muscle tone. The photo below is after 6 weeks. So you can really see a big improvement. And when you take these photos, you want to look at the muscle girth. We want to look at the top line. We also want to look at how the dog is standing. Again, if we compare top to bottom, we can see the top photo, he's standing a little bit more under himself or more tucked in, on the lower side, on the lower photo, we can see he's standing a little bit more natural. Those hind limbs are a little bit further back. His tail position is also higher, indicating more strength, and his top line is flatter. So I recommend doing these once a month and try to pick the same area to do them at so you have the same background and you can take a look at that. The other thing that we can measure is stride length. So certainly when we look at a dog moving, and this is Emily, who was a very well-known show Irish setter, beautiful dog, and you look at the amount of side reach she has is pretty impressive. We can look at photos and we can determine. You can use a gait analysis, a dynamic gait analysis, if you have access to a system. Or I often joke, a poor man's gait analysis. If you live near sand, you could run your dogs in the sand and look how far they're extending their hind limbs. If for those of you wintertime, you can look, and if you have some fresh fallen snow, you can ask your dog to trot through the snow and take a look at how much they're extending with their stride length. So you can kind of also look at videos and determine. Some people are very good at looking at gait through the naked eye. Others have a tougher time. Of course, I always have to bring in safety, and this is a quick video of a dog really struggling to put weight on that right hind limb. We can see that he doesn't want to, and it's because it's painful. And with the pain, we also have weakness. I'm just going to show that again so you can recognize this. So the dog is not putting a lot of weight down on that right foot. We also, can see the muscle shaking. So if the dog is not gaining muscle, if you're trying and you're measuring and still no muscles gaining, I would highly recommend that you get your dog checked out by a veterinarian that understands movement, understands orthopedics, a good sports medicine vet, a sports medicine rehab specialist is also great. Muscle, remember, can never be gained if there's pain or inflammation. So the first thing I think about when a dog is not putting on muscle is there pain or inflammation that we're not aware there? So beginning, we want to start, I know it sounds so simple, but begin with simple weight shifting. And just with a weight shifting activity, and a dog can be sitting or standing on an unstable surface, we're going to start to engage the gluteals, the hamstrings, and the rest of the body. Certainly the dog can start in standing, start in sitting, but then as they go into a stand, we're going to get more work. And this is just an example of a more advanced exercise. We're trying to get him to stand on two unstable surfaces. And I'll play it again so you can see, and then I have a little bit more of a focused one.
So you train again? No, I don't. I turn his body in. Oh, okay.
And then we could see how those hamstrings, the back of the leg, are shaking, and he's working. He's really not in a fully extended position yet either. So here, just looking a little bit more closely.
Yeah. So you train again? No, I don't. I turn his body in. Oh, okay.
That's a nice example of how those hind limbs are working. Now, again, he's not in full extension, and we're really working to try to get him a little bit more extended, and this is a start. And ideally, you want to work until the dog is fatigued, take a break, and then start again. We could keep it a little bit simpler also, so working on any unstable surface. A dog bed is great, an air mattress, a rocker board. I have that written twice. Um, this is another example. And we're just working on this unstable surface and doing a little bit of weight shifting. And again, something as simple as this is starting to engage those all of the booty muscles and starting to work them. Can do a little bit more with weight shifting.
So now we have moves up on two unstable surfaces. These are two discs in the base, and we're going to do the same thing. Sometimes the dog just standing on the uneven surface is going to challenge their balance and challenge their core. And looking for treats, and you can see Moose is wagging his tail, so that's throwing his balance off. But we can position the legs, and again, just do some weight shifting back and forth. And it's very slow and methodical. There's nothing rough about it. We don't want to do this. We want to just rock slowly. So the dog is relaxed, and we're getting some nice weight shifting. And this is going to work the large muscles of the hips, the large muscles of the core, and the large muscles of the shoulder. And again, coming up to the forelimb, do the same thing, just shift back and forth. If you don't have discs at home, you can use sofa cushions or anything else that's unstable. A dog bed or two dog beds, anything like that.
And as we saw here, so, engaging a little bit more of the body, but just weight shifting on unstable surfaces is going to engage those muscles of the booty. Again, we're going to work the core and also the forelimbs too, but we will, start to work on that booty area. Some other ideas for walking on an unstable surface, floating docks, and this is just a quick video of my dog in an area that we live on a floating dock. He has weak hips, so we go down to the docks quite often, and him just walking around on that is helping with balance, proprioception. A lot of times on children's playground sets, they may have a swing area that will work, help challenge the balance and, start to again incorporate the hind end there. Weight shifting with forelimbs up. Anytime the forelimbs are up and the hind limbs are down, we're going to put more weight onto the hind limbs. So this position, just holding it, is going to work more of that booty area. So more of the hamstrings and the gluteals. And we could make it a little bit more difficult by asking the dog to lift the head up or side to side.
So beginning with the hind limbs down and the forelimbs up on an object, we can ask the dog to look up and then go back into a sitting position. And again, like here we're working and Kit's trying to figure it out, and this is perfect. And as she stands, we get a nice push up. We're working those large muscles of the forelimbs, but also working the hind limbs. And this is not something that the dogs will get right away. And it's great. You could see her back is nice and straight, and we're getting good core workout.
And we can just adding the sit and the stand is going to make it a little bit more difficult. But again, just holding this position, and we'll see pictures of this, is great. This is an older Cocker Spaniel that he's been recently shaved down, and we can really see the atrophy in that hind end. So we're safely working on forelimbs up, hind limbs down. One of the things, I'll say this probably a couple more times, is when we have the dog in this position, we want to make sure that they're not painful in the hips and or their spine. So sometimes the dogs can't bring their forelimbs up, not because of weakness, but because of pain in the spine. So if the dog is resisting this, there may be a good reason. And again, getting back to, we never want to cause any pain. When we fine tune it just a little bit, when the dog again has the head up, So when they look up, we're going to increase the weight on the rear. So again, looking up increases more weight on the rear. With the head up and to the left, this is going to increase the weight on the right rear leg. Head up and to the right increases weight on the left rear. So we're just going to have them look the opposite of what leg we want them to work. So for example, if the dog had more of a weakness on the right, you've done your measurements and you've determined that there's more weakness on the right hind limb, you can have them look up and to the left, and this will cause an increase of weight onto the right rear. So you can fine tune it a little bit depending upon what you need. Some other just positions, you can use anything, stairs at home, forelimbs up. You can use an orbit. This is one of our police dogs just on a variety of pieces of equipment. So forelimbs up. If you don't have any equipment at home, you can use an ottoman if your dog can get up that high. You can use a step so they can get up that, just to have them step up on a step. Maybe before the dog goes up the stairs in the evening, if they go up to bed with you, you can have them pause at the different steps. So forelimbs up, hind limbs down, hold for 5 seconds, then go up another step, hold for 5 seconds. So have them continue to repeat. We saw this, the older dog there. So I mentioned head position again is going to be very important. This is a younger dog and she's pretty easily, she's looking around at different things, trying to get her head up, and she had a struggle trying to lift her head up. And primarily because she couldn't do it yet. In this picture, she's only 6 months old. So looking up caused her to challenge her balance a little bit more and put more, more weight onto the rear. So she was more comfortable looking in a neutral position and side to side. Very sweet girl. And our owners wanted her to get into the show ring, so we were just doing some conditioning with her. The heights. I mentioned find a comfortable height, and the poodle is pretty high up. The lab, pretty high up for her. So as I had mentioned, we don't want to have any pain. We want to make sure the hips, if a dog has any hip dysplasia or any arthritis in their hips, they may not be able to extend as much. The same thing with their spine. If they have any arthritis in their spine, any disc disease, or any fusing of the areas, they may not be able to lift their forelimbs as high. So just be cautious. Always start lower rather than higher. Starting with a couple inches is absolutely fine. You don't have to, get crazy at all. We want to do this stay safe and on a steady basis. So very important to just stay conservative. With manual weight shifting, if you see here, this shepherd has forelimbs up on a disc, and in the back, this is one of my wonderful employees, she's just manually shifting weight side to side. In the video with a bulldog, you saw her sitting to stand, and then with the white lab mix, we're just gently doing a weight shift. We don't want to shift, so the dog is losing balance or being thrown off at all.